Well, welcome everyone. I'm just continuing to let folks in. Folks are still trickling in. We're so happy to see you for Industrial Marketing Live. This is the webinar to rule all webinars. It's about webinars today. Maybe we need to create a little bit of a drinking game with the word webinar instead of the word focus today. But we're super excited to see you all. I'm Peyton. You've got Mary and Brendan here joining me, a few other gorillas on the call too. For folks who are joining for the first time, I see a few new names. We love the chat, so you're always welcome to ask questions there, have separate conversations, whatever you need to do to get the most out of this session, do it. We also welcome folks to turn their cameras on. We love seeing faces, and you know, if you can nod along, like, yes. Hey, this is
Garrett, Emily, and Kristen. Nice to see you.
Yeah, say it's to let us know that it's resonating with you, or that, hey, we want to dive deeper here. That's always great. We'd love to bring people on the stage and talk through specific scenarios too. So if you have a webinar question, a webinar situation you are finding yourself in right now, this would be a great day to talk about it together. So the first 20 minutes or so, we'll kind of talk through what webinars are to us, how we're thinking about them in today's day and age, and then we'll just jump into it from there. So to get us started, I think we need a really good example of what a webinar is.
Yes. Yes, we do.
So Brendan, do you want to take it away?
I will take it away. All right. So I guess Peyton already said hello. We didn't really plan much for this one, so sorry, we'll just skip that slide. So this is my agenda. So this is the things that we're going to be covering. And it's what is a webinar? So this is a webinar. We're in a webinar about webinars. So what is a webinar? A webinar is an online event that is hosted by an organization or company and broadcast to a select group of individuals like yourselves through our computers via the internet. It's also sometimes referred to as a webcast, an online event, or a web seminar. This definition was brought to you by the Financial Services Commission of Ontario. So that's kind of all we have for you guys today. So please hold all of your questions to the end. We actually don't want any questions. We're hoping you don't ask them so that we don't get put on the spot. But I think we should stop sharing that and actually talk about how to actually run a real good webinar. So what do we want to talk about? So I think we have 4 key things we want to talk about today. Preparing, promotion, doing the dang thing, and then what we want to do in post with all the good content that we're creating. So before every single IML, me, Mary, and Peyton, and then any guests that we bring on, we always do preparation. So we figure out what topic we want to do, and then we create an outline, and we just kind of go through the things that we want to cover. We always start with an end state and then a plan. That's how all good strategy starts, right? You have a good end state, and then you work on the plan that leads you to what that end state is going to be. So you want to think about what your goal is, right? So is this going to be an educational thing? A lot of times with industrials, you're looking at, is there going to be a training certificate that's a part of it? If you have technicians that are going to be working on your equipment, they have to get certified. So are you trying to get them certifications? Are you trying to teach your reps or your distributors on how to use a product? So do you want to get them the right product information so that they can go and actually sell your product? Or just like an educational thing like this, our goal here with IML is to help create a community and to educate industrial marketers across the globe so that we can elevate industrial marketing and actually, have leadership start to pick up on this is how we actually do marketing instead of doing trade shows and brochures. So we have this event so that we can start facilitating some of those conversations. And I think we would say avoid, always writing out a script. Scripts kind of take away your creativity and the conversation, right? You feel like you have to follow the bullet point list. So we always start with just an outline, bullet points, key topics you want to hit, and then kind of let the conversation go where you want to go. I'd say so Mary, you want to talk about how we, how we kind of organize the format with this, with speakers and just assembling the webinar?
Yeah, for sure. So First of all, I want to like tell you how pumped I am about this topic. This is how I kind of made my inroads at my former company, Spraying Systems. I started a webinar series after COVID. We had a spray technology seminar that we used to run. It was like a 3-day event, and it would cover all these like really technical spray topics. So my idea was to bring that online after COVID and just take out topic by topic, talk for an hour, answer questions. And just like Brendan said, the prep is the most important part. And part of that is making sure that you're topic focused and not product focused. So that's a really hard thing, especially for leadership to wrap their mind around when you're selecting a topic, is like, we're not talking about a product here. This is not a sales webinar. This is educating people so that they can make more informed decisions. So that's like number one. Number two is how we structure it. So I knew I wanted to structure it. We were really lucky that we had a PhD subject matter expert in-house. So he was like spray technology and atomization, like guru. He was like published in many papers. So that was like really awesome. And luckily he was like a pretty dynamic speaker, which was nice. But as his counterpart, we had a sales rep who was also like pretty well versed in spray. He had been with the company for like 3 to 5 years. So he knew enough about the products to like have some good back and forth. And he was dynamic enough to create a good conversation back and forth. So I think that's super key, is making sure, A, you have a topic that people are going to care about. It's not product focused. And you have 2 speakers who can treat the webinar or live event, as some of you might have seen in my LinkedIn post, as if it's going to be a conversation or a discussion and not a lecture. Now, the other thing that we talked about in prep was making sure that you had a moderator. So someone who can set it up, make sure the registrants are getting in, is fielding the chat, can interrupt the conversation with questions. Because again, you want this to be a conversation. What we don't want to do is like drone on for 45 minutes, get this big list of questions, and then just pop off answers at the end of like with the last 15 minutes, right? You want to make sure that you have that moderator who can field the questions as they're coming in. Do you want to like build off anything, Brendan? It feels like you want to say something there.
No, I'm just nodding along. I think that's all. It's all super great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that one thing that I would add, Mary, is just that like, maybe how is this really different? How has this changed from like the webinars of the past to now? Like, can you just explain a little bit more about why you need a team to run a good webinar, a good live event?
Yeah, for sure. I think so many people have gotten conditioned that a webinar is basically a sales pitch, like shielded as an educational topic. So people see the word webinar and they're like, oh, I'm about to get pitched right now. Like, and that's what I think. I'm like, oh, I'm about to hear somebody drone on for 45 minutes about a product or an application inside a specific market or industry. So we started out calling it a webinar, and we had about like 20 to 25 registrants for the first couple. And then I was like, something's going on here. I know we're missing something. So we changed it and called it a virtual event in all our promos, and registration doubled. So even just like reframing how you're thinking about the word webinar and what you're actually doing can really help like your audience understand what you're really doing. Because we weren't really doing a webinar, because if you look at a webinar, it's really just someone lecturing for 30 to 45 minutes. And what we were really doing was just videotaping a discussion. And it was a live event because people could come in, ask questions of these like spray tech experts and get the answers on the spot. I mean, that was like huge in our industry. And I'm sure it's like big in some of yours where people just aren't doing that.
So once you get your team together, you know, how we prep for IML, and we thought about sending our prep recording into the Slack group if you guys really want a good laugh of how we prepare for these presentations each time, is we just get on a quick call and we have a very brief outline, and then we talk through it to get to the point where we're figuring out what nuggets we want to share. who needs to jump in at different sections of the conversation, how we can throw it between each other to keep that conversational nature. And if we want to include visuals, at all. In the last couple of IMLs, if you've tuned in or rewatched, we have been pulling in a few more visuals than we did at the beginning of the year. We think that it's been really helpful. But one of the things that we really want to stress is that you don't need slides to have a good webinar, and you definitely shouldn't hide behind your slides. So if you are going to be just putting a wall of text up on the screen, you need to expect that folks are going to want to read that, and then they're not going to necessarily be listening to what you have to say. So they need to complement each other. Brendan, Mary, have you guys seen things that work really well as far as visuals or just overall slide etiquette?
Yeah, I would say your visuals need to accentuate the point that you're making with your mouth. So you don't want the slides to be making the point yourself, because you're going to lose people's attention, right? If people are sitting there reading, they're not listening to what you're saying. I've done a lot of briefings for the military, and we put a lot of stuff on our slides, and it gets overwhelming because you're trying to read everything that someone put on the slide, because you assume that everything that someone put on the slide is important. A lot of times they're not. You probably can cut things down by 90% to the very key things that you're trying to make a point on. Really good visuals are good. Examples. We would show, like, if I do a presentation about a water bottle, let's talk about the features and pull off the cap, right? Like, we would do presentations at Graco, and we would bring in components of the pump and show them, like, this is how this piece works with the fluid and that sort of thing. But it was always to accentuate the point that we're making with our mouths. So a couple bullet points per slide, low amount of text, a lot of visual, a lot of pictures, colors good. Don't do like what I did in that example, right? With 4 web clipping pictures that don't help your point at all, right? Like, what is the one picture or graphic or video that is really going to help you make a point? Everything needs to be working together and be cohesive. And then feel free to, like, turn the slides on for a little bit to make the point, then turn it back off so you get back onto your face, and be willing. Like, that's what's nice about having a moderator, is you have the flexibility to start doing some of that stuff if you have other people on the call with you. Mary, what other things have you noticed good for visuals?
Yeah, we did a lot of video that can work pretty well. Sometimes it depends on what webinar software you're using. That was another point that we brought in when you're trying to prep for a webinar. I tried both application-based, so like a Zoom and a GoToWebinar, and a browser-based. The one that we tried was Webinar Ninja. I would definitely recommend the application. In the browser-based webinar system, we had a lot of trouble with people cutting off bandwidth, and that can, like, affect the quality of the video that you guys are putting out. And it affected our recording too. So just something to, like, knock in there. But to Brendan's point, I made my inroads using slide decks as an industrial marketer. So I took our really crappy slide decks that looked a lot like the one that Brendan showed you guys at the beginning, added a ton of color, added a ton of pictures, changed up the fonts so they weren't Arial. Oh my goodness. And that blew people away. That was like, if you just do, like, a little bit more than what's going on now, you can just make such a huge splash at these companies. And, like, our company wasn't small. We were a pretty large company, and just making, like, one step up from what it's doing now is just, like, so huge.
So we've done a lot of talking about, just getting ready for the webinar. I feel like, well, maybe before we move on, Craig had a question here. Craig, feel free to unmute if you want to talk, but does using an app-based webinar host make it more difficult for attendees to log on? Any opinions on that? Yeah,
I did not like GoToWebinar, so that took a lot longer. So if people didn't have it already installed on their computer, we got a lot of feedback that takes a long time to upload and then get into the waiting room and stuff. But Zoom was great. I mean, I think it took people less than a minute to, if they didn't already have it installed on their computers, to both install and then log into the event.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then Rachel had a question on well, we had a question on font style to use, and then our favorite webinar platforms. For font style, Brendan, you suggested sans serif. I'd agree with that.
Agree.
Yeah, stay away from any of the crazy Georgias or Times New Roman. It's just so difficult to read on the screen, right? Like that's really like for books and printed material. I just anything screen. I always just use a sans serif and make it easier. Like you always want to make everything accessible for your readers to consume, right? If it's any modicum of difficulty, no one's going to consume what you're putting out there. Make it as easy as possible.
All right, and then favorite webinar platform. Rachel said that they use Event Builder. Is anyone else familiar with that in this group? Not heard of it.
No, I don't think I've used Event Builder. I love Zoom. Zoom webinar was fantastic. That's what I used for all mine. Even after trying out those other ones after using Zoom webinar, I went back to Zoom webinar because it's just so easy to use.
Yeah, and I like the way that we use it for these events. We actually don't set up a webinar for the event. We just set up a registration link. So you register for a meeting instead of registering for a webinar. It does reduce some of the metrics that you can track. Like I can't see how many people attended this on a weekly basis, without counting the little grids here. So we are missing some numbers, but if those numbers aren't important to you, if they're not part of your goal of why you're doing the webinar, then you're not losing much. And it's nice to see everyone's faces. So maybe selfish that I just like to see y'all instead of count how many people attended. So jumping forward, let's talk about, you put all this work into putting the webinar together. Now we want to make sure that people actually see it and are there to enjoy the live moment. So what's your suggestion as far as just the norm for promotion for a webinar?
So I'm gonna have the norm, and then I think what you should do. So I think the norm is you send out something, you're like, oh crap, our webinar is in 2 weeks. We better send out an email that invites all our customers to the webinar and then post it on our company LinkedIn page. What I think you should do is start planning for promotion as you're planning for the webinar itself. So I'm gonna throw some statistics or hacks at you because that's one of my favorite parts about this series. If you send out an invite 2 weeks ahead of the date, you can pretty much bet that that's about 60% of your total registrants that are going to go forward for your whole event. So take that number, that's about 60%. It worked like a charm, you guys. I did not believe it at all. And almost every single time it checked out that if you send it out 2 weeks before, that's going to be about 60% of your total registrants. Then I would send it out a week before, and then again 2 days before. Remember to take out anybody who's already registered because that's really annoying to get the same thing twice. So I would always pull out the people who have already registered for the webinar so they're not getting all these invites. And then we didn't do anything. I think we did a couple organic LinkedIn on the company page, but we got our sales team involved. So we made sure they knew what the webinar title was, when it was going to be. They had a cool image at least to help promote it, and then put it out on their organic LinkedIn pages. How about you, Brendan? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. When I was at Graco, we would mess around with a lot of Marketo automation, and that can get pretty complicated really quickly, with tokens and all that. But if you're good at marketing automation, I would definitely use that to help you, send the initial email out, pull out the people that registered so that they don't get the email again. I think like Mary said, having 2 to 3 emails prior to the webinar. And then outside of organically posted on LinkedIn, there's also an opportunity to do promoted webinars as well with paid. I haven't really done a whole lot of this, but it doesn't take a lot of money, right? We're not talking about trying to deliver a message to people multiple times. You're just trying to get them to register for the webinar once, right? So, $500 to $1,000 if you have the budget, maybe even less, maybe $100 just to get the word out there to people in your target market, right? Getting your sales team to ask your current customers is really great for customer retention, but ultimately, as marketing, we want to find new business. And so just putting some sort of paid behind it on LinkedIn or Facebook, I think will definitely help you just to create some of that brand awareness, some of that trust with your ICP, without there ever being like a sales thing in the back end. And as long as you talk about like what Mary talked about earlier is a live event instead of a webinar where people don't have that guardrail up to not join it if they don't know your brand. If it's more of an educational thing, like put the topic, put the outline of what you're going to cover in the post, and get new customers in there so they can start interacting with your brand some and seeing like the real people behind Acme Corporation. And I think to that point, we'll talk about this later. Don't let your sales team take over the webinar or take your list and turn it into a sales thing, because that's going to destroy any sort of brand credibility or trust that you have on the marketing side. Educate people, get them to come to your website and fill out the quote form. And then, I would track qualitatively, like put it in the how did you hear about us field. I saw your webinar. Like that'd be really great feedback that your promotion was working well, as that you start getting some of that qualitative feedback in your RFQ process. Merritt, what would you think would be a good budget to start with to start promoting on paid social?
Yeah, I would go, if you're going to just start out, LinkedIn is an easier one to get your leadership team behind. If you can get them to do $10 a day, that'd be awesome. But if they're open to it or they just don't care that much, do it on Facebook. Honestly, your reach is going to be higher, especially if you're retargeting on some of your high intent pages. Like, I think there's a ton of opportunity for webinar registrations on Facebook.
Hey, Jared, how about you come on and if you're comfortable, let's talk about that question.
It's something I've looked into it a couple times. I've seen other people doing paid webinars through some niche publications who is like our company deals with some pretty specific verticals at times. So there are a handful of magazines or publications that are hitting a very specific market. So I've looked at what it costs to do this. I've never actually looked at doing one realistically yet. But I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts were on that topic.
Yeah, so I'll take this one first, Mary.
Yeah, go ahead.
From my experience, those have been pretty expensive, offerings from the publications. I think on average, what I saw out there was like $10,000 per webinar, and like they have a very niche audience. But with with LinkedIn, you can get the same level of detail, cold targeting wise, that you can get with the webinar, and you can run the event yourself. I've seen a lot of time, writing articles or doing events with publications, like they are very heavy on the editorial side and really scrutinizing what you do. And so you kind of lose some freedom there in how you promote it yourself, what you do with the content afterwards. So I would rather just take that $10,000 and run 10 webinars that year and promote all 10 of those for $1,000 instead of just doing one event with a publication, right? And it's your own thing, and you get to keep the list. You get to do, you keep all that control. I'm not a big fan of like putting money into places where I start losing control on metrics or contacts or creative. So I would just think about like that. As long as you can get to your audience on LinkedIn or Facebook, I would do that instead of going through publication.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if the publication is big enough too, like cold targeting on Facebook, you can target publications. Like if people follow them, like in a Facebook group or something, like look that up, because you can target specific groups on Facebook. Totally agree with everything Brendan said. If you're going to try it out just because, your leadership team is like really encouraging you to do it, make sure you give them a unique URL so that you can at least track the success of it as far as registrations go. So just like, if you're like, even better, if you can do like a side-by-side, if they're like really pushing the industry publication, give them that unique URL, show them the ROI, Facebook, LinkedIn versus the industry publication.
Has anybody on here had success running webinars through a publication or a third party?
Yeah, just throw up something in the chat or something. We'd love to see that.
Speaking of the chat, while folks are chiming in about that, Parker had a question about when to start your paid ads. What's the norm there? What's your recommendation? And hey, Parker, glad you're here.
Yeah, me too. I would definitely say 2 weeks before. I don't know about you guys. I think it's definitely worth a test to see if maybe a month before would work. But whenever I see like a month before, I get kind of annoyed. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm really interested. Now I got to wait a month to go watch this thing. Yeah. But I think it's worth a test. That's just me. That's my very subjective opinion.
My opinion as somebody who's scheduled a lot of things coming from the client success world, moving into strategy, is that 2 weeks out is the sweet spot, because a lot of people don't have their calendars full at about 2 weeks out. So you've got a lot of space. So someone sees a topic, they're like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll just go ahead and say, register, add to calendar. And sure, maybe they'll come, maybe they won't, but they've at least expressed an interest. And so now if you send the recording afterwards, you've got the opportunity to like deepen the relationship there. But really 2 weeks, I feel like same as when you're trying to schedule a call with a customer, 2 weeks out is a really generous and kind of flexible time frame. That's my take on calendars.
I think one final point I'd like to make on the promotion side is just like with all marketing, right? Like make sure your messaging to invite people to the event is focused on your customer and not on yourself, right? Like the headline or the title of your event shouldn't be, come see Gorilla talk really cool stuff about marketing because we're so great at marketing. No, it's like, we want to help you run webinars, right? So, or, come learn how you can, increase the throughput of your fluid with this new pump technology that we created. Right. So like try to find ways to get your messaging to focus on your customer and put your customer as the center of any story that you ever write for marketing. That's I think a good tip for everything we do. And like, I always forget it too. So I just try to always keep that in mind at the top of my head. It's always about the customer, never about myself or my company. Yeah. And then emails, paid. So like you can use similar content copy and all those things. Write it once and then you just get the same message out across every channel that you use.
Yeah, agree.
One more hack that I think is helpful is that you don't have to always be writing these things from scratch. A lot of the platforms like Zoom, GoToWebinar, they have automated emails that they send. And yeah, it's not as like fluffy or, personal, and you can always customize those, but those automated emails are also really helpful just to make sure that folks remember to actually click into the event the day of. So
Alex, that's a good one. I like that one.
yeah. So Alex had a question and I want to come to it about running the same webinar on a regular basis. I've seen this with, maybe like a personal finance webinar or something that I get advertised on Instagram. And then, they're just running the same thing once a month. Have y'all experienced this in the industrial space where you do maybe a recurring webinar?
I did. So when we did ours, we started out with like a spray basics webinar, and that's the one where we had like maybe 20, 25 registrants. And then we did it again 7 months later. So we got a lot more registrants and a lot more participation from the group. So it's almost like content marketing, right? You should always be repurposing in some way. I think that you can take a subject like that, look at the questions that come in, and then revamp the current presentation that you ran to like address some new questions. I think you're always going to get more out of it the second, maybe even the third time you do it. What do you think, Brendan?
Yeah, I would agree. Like coming back to something with an extended amount of time is probably the right cadence. It does go back to your goals, right? Like if you are like continually educating technicians or sales reps on things like for internal purposes, I think that would probably be good, right? Like just a recurring meeting that, if new employees come in or new reps or new maintenance people come in, then yeah, maybe having a standing one just so that your customers can know that cadence and they know like they can bring someone into that event to get training. But if you're doing an educational marketing type thing, I feel like that content can get really stale if that's like an external facing event. And so I would rather see you hit the topic from different angles instead of running the same topic over and over again.
So we've prepared, we've promoted. Now it's the day of the event. What are your tips? What's your guidance, Mary, Brendan, on the day of the event?
Doing it
live.
Yeah. As a moderator, so I'm guessing since you guys are all industrial marketers, you're likely the moderator too. Get there 15 minutes early, make sure it's recording correctly, make sure it's getting set up correctly. Just like definitely check that box. I've been in webinars where it's very obvious that they got in like 2 minutes before it started and they're still trying to pull up everything. So get there early, let as many people as you can in early, especially if they're people who have been to a recurring webinar series like we did ours monthly. So let those guys in, you know, don't be afraid to chit chat with them for a while. Even like chit chatting with your hosts like ahead of the call is kind of fun. I always kind of liked when I would enter a webinar and they were like in the middle of a conversation already. It just felt a little more natural to me. Let's see. Any hacks, Brendan, on like gear and stuff that you should have?
So I think to that point, like getting in early, like especially when you're bringing a subject matter expert in that maybe is not super comfortable on camera. So first off, just making sure like their internet connection is stable, their audio sounds okay, their visuals sound okay, they don't got weird stuff in their background. And then like to Mary's point, just start chit chatting. I think we talked about this in our video episode as well. But just doing some like just chat with you know, your co-host a little bit to get them warmed up, so that they're in a talkative frame of mind when the meeting starts, so that they're not just coming in cold. You know, I would say on the gear side, you know, a good decent webcam, as strong as your internet connection can handle. You know, HD is always better. You know, it looks a lot cleaner. Make sure you get a ring light. Unlike myself today, I look like I'm in a little cave, but like look at Peyton's setup. So Peyton's camera, like her lighting's super bright. She looks great. Her background is very clean. It's not you know, it's not cluttered, but it kind of shows off some of her personality. Look at my personality. So I'm still working on it. I've only been in this house for a year, but so I think just like little stuff like that can just help to elevate just a little bit. Like Mary said, like every company is doing these, but they're all doing them at a kind of a low level, right? So just these little tiny improvements that you can make your event a lot more pleasing, and more people are going to talk about and want to come and join in and see what you're doing. So just finding like little ways to make improvements. Any other things? Like a decent mic. So I think a lot of us at Gorilla are running the Blue Yeti mic, which we all seem to like. That works good for us. So yeah, I think you know, figuring out just what your little setup is good. Close everything else. I don't have Google Chrome running if you can, because that sucks up a lot of bandwidth. So just try to like keep your space as clear as possible. Yeah, I think like just for on the prep side of the day of that is, I think what I would talk about there. Yeah.
Recording it. Peyton had a really good hack with this one. Peyton, got to share it.
What I'm trying to remember what my hack was.
Your cloud versus
computer.
computer.
Yes. Okay. So if you are using Zoom, there's a difference, but you can record to your computer or you can record to the cloud. Pro tip, record to the cloud. Yes, it takes a little bit more bandwidth, but afterwards it will separate all of your different recordings out. So you can have, you know, the talking head view, you can have the shared screen view, you can have the gallery view. If you record to your computer, you're only going to get one option whenever the recording is done. So makes it a little bit harder to repurpose afterwards. And I know we've got some questions about, you know, that promotion or distributing content afterwards. So if you record to the cloud, you'll just be putting yourself in a much better position to really leverage that post distribution. Another tip that Mary, you talked about was just customizing the subject matter of the actual event during the event. So like at the very start of the event, kind of polling some people. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, we had a really cool subject matter expert. He was like a subject matter in like spray drop size, which was super niche, but like very interesting to some people. And he was like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I can tailor how I'm explaining this based on the industry. And this was during our prep call, which is why it's important to have a prep call. And I was like, oh, that's super cool. I can put up a poll, you know, list, you know, 6 to 8 industries, have everyone who's registered say which industry they're coming from. And then he just discussed everything through the lens of the top 3 industries that people came from. So that was like awesome. People loved it. They were able to answer super specific questions, and it just reinforces your credibility as a subject matter expert. So that was an awesome way to do it if you can.
So Rachel had a question, and we can always come back to the actual day of the event. But I feel like a lot of us here have run webinars, so we don't need to dive too deep there. But after the event, Rachel, you said that y'all have struggled with follow-up after the webinar. Do we have any advice or strategies around webinar follow-up, especially for the sales team?
Rachel, what are you doing right now? If you don't mind jumping on, and just kind of talking about like what your playbook is right now.
Oh, is it? Can I talk? Yeah, you're on.
Yep. Yep. We hear you.
You can hear me. Okay, great. So we've been doing a lot of educational webinars, and we've been making them on demand and recording them and following up with like thank you emails, but we really are struggling and drawing a blank with what happens next. So next steps or advice that we can give our sales team to go out with customer information that we're getting from webinars so they can go out and reach out to the customer.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Because we want to continue doing webinars. I feel like they're really successful. We get a lot of great attendance. We're really growing awareness in a lot of areas in our business through them, but the sales team doesn't know what to do with that. And I'm having a difficult time answering that question myself.
I would say my number one tip, we did this for the last time for post webinar, do not give your list to sales. Protect that webinar registration list at all costs. They did not attend your webinar to get talked to by a sales rep later, but what you can do with it, if this is an option in your marketing strategy, is retarget those folks with either like an email campaign with like a newsletter, sending them clips. So if you can chop up your webinar into like 6 to 8 videograms and then just send them clips like, hey, just a reminder on this topic. We had a lot of great feedback about it. If you have any more questions, and then maybe just summarize it in a post. You could do it on paid social, on Facebook or LinkedIn. If that's a route you want to go, DM me on LinkedIn and I can walk you through the steps on how to do that too.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
And thank you. Yeah. So keep it away from sales.
Yeah. Keep it away.
Don't give it to sales.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we said, like that's probably the easiest way to make it so that that person never comes to a webinar you do again. Just like, whenever like you're like, oh, I want to read that cool ebook. That looks like it might be interesting. And then someone immediately LinkedIn's you or emails you. Oh, I guess I will never interact with that company ever again. But I will like, so to Mary, like, I think, doing the retargeting list, like Mary said, was a good idea. But yeah, even just like a follow-up, hey, thanks for attending the event. Maybe a couple bullet points, like these are the main things that we talked about, and then give them the option to raise their hand. So give them a call to action to, hey, if you want more information or you want to request a quote, here's a button to do that. So let them raise their hand, and then, let that start the sales process instead of your sales team going after them. Sometimes like what I would do, like if we were doing something like this with our distribution when I was at Graco, would be, I tell my sales team like, hey, this is from your customers that you already interact with on a day-to-day basis who came. Here's the people that you can talk to about that. So I'd be very, very selective on what names I would give to the sales team. If it was a person that they were already interacting with a lot, I would give that to them so they can have something to talk about. But yeah, any sort of like new business, new customers, never, ever, ever. The sales team does not get that list until they raise their hand and they want to be talked to by sales.
So following the webinars though, like outside of how to collaborate with sales in a better way, in a way that's more friendly for your attendee, what do you typically do with the recording?
Yeah. So I think like I just posted about this on LinkedIn. I think this is probably the best thing an industrial marketer has to create content is an event like this, because it's so easy to get your subject matter expert here, right? Like, so instead of me having an engineer sit down and write an article that probably is going to take him at least a day to write, he doesn't have that time to do that, right? He's building new technology, he's helping customers. He doesn't have time to be writing content for you or doing video content for you all the time. But it's a lot easier to get them onto a prep call for a half hour and then an event for an hour. So from there, each of these events, like, so you have one long form video you can put on YouTube. You can put the whole event on YouTube, cut them up. Like you probably get 3 to 4 like decent sized long form videos, like 5 to 10 minutes. And then each of those, you're probably going to get 5 videograms from. So like, that's a lot of video content right there. You could probably get one long form article from a event like this. probably 5 to 6 blog posts. God knows how many social posts you could do off of each of these, or how many tweets you can get out of one event. And then from there, like, just put them into every single channel, right? Like, so you have LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, email, your website, written articles. Like, it's almost endless amount of things you could do with one single event like this. I think you could power your marketing for at least a month with just one event. Talking about organic and paid promotion with these assets. Like, we a lot of times will use our IML stuff, which is an organic, but there's an opportunity for us to start doing that on the paid side as well, just to get educational material out there and start building brand awareness. Mary, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Create a content engine from your live events. Another unique thing that we didn't only put it on YouTube. We also I made a separate web page on our research and development website that was just for webinars, and it would show you like an opportunity to register for all upcoming. And it was like a module based where you could see all the recordings from the previous two with just like a brief summary, who the speakers were, what they talked about, what the main points were. Yeah, I would say in order, like if you're looking to processize this, upload the recording into rev.com is what we use for transcription.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like, what, $1 a minute?
With the automated one's $0.25 a minute.
Yeah, it's
without a human looking at it.
Insanely cheap.
And insanely
upload it to
valuable.
rev.com. Yeah. And then write a blog post about it. So there's your long form blog post. If you can keyword research it, even better. Chop it up for your sales team. Like, make it so easy for them to use this. Like, I used to like literally section it out. Like, here's what you should post about on LinkedIn if you're going to use this. Videograms for sure. So if you have the software to do it, then definitely chop it up like Brendan said. So there's your process, like rev.com, blog post, social media post, videograms. Super easy. Upload all of those onto all your channels.
Yeah. Podcast, like one podcast episode, right? Like I think this would be a good podcast episode, right? So it's like almost endless the amount of stuff you can make with this. And then I think one of the best things is you kind of get an endless idea generator out of this too, right? Like everyone in here has asked a lot of questions. Like, we could probably do an event on almost every single one of these questions, or at least like have an article to write about with every one of these questions. So like that's why we're so into like having this be a customer conversation, right? Like, instead of us talking at you for an hour, like, we have conversations and then use that to make your topics up for the next time. Because if somebody's asking this webinar, there's probably 100,000 other people out in your ICP that are also asking the same questions. Your competition is not really doing that, right? Like, this is such a great way to elevate your content marketing. And then you're not having to sit down and brainstorm for a year and creating a content calendar. Like, what am I going to do on March or on like October 17th? Like, well, you don't have to know that, because in August, you're going to do an event and you're going to get a ton of ideas out of that for what's going to help you in Q4.
Yeah. And look, I'm sure your companies are great. I'm all for it. But like, if you can put on your resume that you started a webinar series, got it for 7 months, increase registration from 20 to 150. I know for sure these 3 people became leads from it. Like, I guarantee you're going to get a promotion somewhere. So like I said, I'm sure you love your companies, but we're also here for you. And if you need help doing that, just let me know.
So before, there's so much more we could talk about posts. So if anyone's got specific questions, I'd love to take maybe a few more questions here as we round out. But
we'll take them in the IML group as well too, on our Slack group.
Yeah, for sure. Always welcome. And for the newbies today, if you would like to join the Industrial Marketing Live Slack community, just send us a message here in the chat and I will send you an invite. But I wanted to bounce back up to something that Kristen mentioned earlier about using webinars to kind of promote a product launch. So like doing a series. Kristen, can I put you on the spot? My favorite thing to do is put you on the spot. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how you did that? And I think that would just be, that's probably really useful to a lot of folks here.
Sure. So we are actually entering into building our Bolt platform at IM Robotics. They were launching the Bolt robot, AMR. And in doing so, we pulled out our key differentiators and had made each of them a main topic for a webinar. But then we also took the value proposition and the things we were hearing in the industry about why customers were looking for a mid-size AMR. And so from there, it was like a 10 series webinar, and we kicked it off with kind of an Ask Me Anything Reddit style with our engineers. And the momentum built throughout the series. It was great. And we were able to tie that back to 3 pre-sale deals, which was awesome.
That is so cool, Kristen. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Then you can basically redo product positioning too. So you can turn that into opening into new verticals, right?
Oh my gosh, it was fantastic. We had so much content.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So cool. Oh, and for those of you guys who don't know, Kristen is also in the Slack group, and she's awesome. She's a really good participator. Oh, Dale, I do want to address your day of promotion posts on LinkedIn. I used to do that we do it for IML, and I used to do it at my old company. And we would always get at least a few more registrants, anywhere from 5. And I think Peyton said one of our organic LinkedIn posts got 20 extra registrants the day before. So yeah, posting about it on organic social media definitely works.
100%. I love to lean on, if you're concerned about being annoying, I love to lean on those automated reminders, because it's it's not me, but I just want to be convenient. So here's the link. Don't forget to come. So that's always really handy. Pro tip, I do the same thing for calendar invites for important meetings, where you add a few extra notifications in there. Just don't forget. Show up on time. Awesome. Well, Parker, Krista, I'll get you into the Slack group. Chase, I'll get you into the Slack group. I was trying to type in responses, but really appreciate you all being here this week. We are super excited to just continue to grow with this community, and we look forward to seeing you all again in the end of May. So happy spring, and we hope you all have a good rest of your week. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.